It's strange how a single sentence can split your life into a before and an after. One minute you're numb, dressed in black, hands folded in your lap as the pastor talks about a woman you loved and resented in equal measure. The next, you're staring at a stranger in the back row, a woman with your eyes and your cheekbones, who stands and says, "I'm sorry for your loss. I'm her daughter too." My whole life unraveled in that moment. My mother, my formidable, secretive, impossible mother, had another daughter. And she never told me. You're watching Women Unwritten. Tap like and subscribe so more voices get heard. I can still hear the way the words fell, heavy and sure, as if this woman had rehearsed them for years. My aunt clapped a hand over her mouth. My cousin whispered, "Is this a joke?" But I couldn't speak. I couldn't move. I could only watch as the woman approached the casket, tears streaming down her face. Afterwards, when the last of the mourners drifted out, she found me in the vestibule. Her voice was low. "I'm Eva. I didn't want to do this here, but I needed to say goodbye." She looked at me, and I saw my mother's wary gaze, the same wary gaze I'd inherited. "We need to talk," she said. I wanted to run. Instead, I nodded. We sat in my car, the windows fogging up in the damp chill. Eva's story spilled out in fits and starts. Our mother, my mother, had given her up for adoption when she was 19. She never reached out, Eva told me. But I found her. I wrote letters. I left messages. She never responded. I felt cold all over. I tried to picture my mother at 19, scared and alone. I tried to picture her making that choice. But all I could see was the woman who'd raised me, tight-lipped and hard, who'd taught me how to walk away from pain without ever looking back. Eva handed me a worn envelope. "This was returned to me last year. I thought maybe you should have it." Inside was a letter, addressed in my mother's careful, slanted hand. It was unopened. I ran my finger over the seal. My mother's voice echoed in my head. "We don't air our dirty laundry." But here it was, out in the open. I wanted to scream. I wanted to sleep for 100 years. Instead, I started to read. The letter was short, apologetic. She wrote about regret, about choices made in fear. She said she hoped Eva would find happiness, even if it couldn't be with her. No explanation, no warmth, just a signature and a date. Eva wiped her eyes. I thought she'd at least want to know me? I looked at her, this woman who shared my blood, my nose, the same crooked smile when she tried not to cry. I wondered how many times my mother had looked at me and seen Eva's ghost. We sat in silence until Eva said, "I should go." I watched her walk away, feeling something inside me break and shift, like an iceberg cleaving off into the sea. That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, replaying every memory of my mother. Had she ever tried to tell me? Had I missed some sign, some moment when her eyes lingered too long on a stranger's face? In the morning, I found myself at her house, sorting through boxes of photographs and receipts and brittle letters. I was searching for something, proof, maybe, or forgiveness. All I found were secrets. In a shoebox tucked in the back of her closet, I discovered a stack of photographs. Most were familiar: birthday parties, Christmas mornings, the two of us posed in front of the plastic tree. But near the bottom, there was a photo I'd never seen. My mother, younger, softer, holding a baby girl in a faded yellow blanket. On the back, in my mother's neat handwriting, she'd written, "Eva, 1977. I held the photo for a long time, tracing the outline of my mother's hand, the uncertain smile on her face. She looked so young, so unguarded. I wondered if she'd loved Eva in those first moments, before fear closed around her heart like a fist. I took the photo to Eva. She lived in a small apartment, all thrifted furniture and framed landscapes. She answered the door in sweatpants, her hair piled on top of her head. "I found this," I said, holding out the photograph. Eva's hand trembled as she took it. For a moment, she looked so hopeful, so desperate for connection, that I wanted to hug her. But I didn't. I just watched as she pressed the photo to her chest. "She kept it," Eva whispered. "All these years." I nodded. She kept it. We sat on her couch, the photo between us like a fragile bridge. She told me about her childhood, foster homes, a kind but distant adoptive mother, a longing that never went away. I told her about mine, piano lessons, strict curfews, a mother who never said "I love you," but showed it in casseroles and clean laundry. We were both daughters, and we were both lost. As the days went by, I tried to make sense of it all. I tried to forgive my mother, but the hurt sat in my chest like a stone. I wondered what else she'd hidden. I wondered what kind of woman I would have been if I'd known about Eva sooner. The whispers started in town. Small towns have long memories and short tongues. At the grocery store, Mrs. Carver asked if it was true. At the bank, Mr. Fields gave me a look that lingered too long. Even my closest friends started to pull away, as if my mother's secret was contagious. I wanted to scream at all of them. I wanted to tell them that I was just as blindsided as they were. But I didn't. I just kept my head down and kept moving. Then, one morning, I found an envelope in my mailbox. No return address. Inside was a photocopy of my mother's adoption papers. The name Eva Marie Turner, my mother's signature, and a note scribbled in pencil. "You deserve to know." My hands shook as I read it. Someone wanted me to hurt. Someone wanted me to be humiliated. I called Eva. She came over right away, bringing coffee and a box of donuts. We sat at my kitchen table, the adoption papers between us. "Someone is trying to stir things up," I said. Eva looked tired. "It's a small town. People talk." I nodded. "What do we do?" She shrugged. "We live. We tell our story. We let them talk." But I wasn't sure I could. I wasn't sure I wanted to. That night, I lay awake, thinking about all the things my mother had never told me. I thought about the way she'd looked at me, the way she'd held me when I cried, the way she'd never let herself be soft. I wondered if I could be braver than her. I wondered if I could tell the truth. I woke up the next morning with a headache and a heaviness in my chest that felt almost physical, like I'd swallowed a stone that refused to pass. The town was already whispering about us, about my mother's secret daughter, about me, the woman who apparently didn't know her own family. Every phone call felt like a test. Every knock at the door made me flinch. I'd always believed I was good at weathering storms, but this one felt different. This one felt like it was inside the house with me. I sat at the kitchen table, staring at the adoption papers. My mother's signature stared back at me, careful and precise, as if she'd signed away a library book, not a child. The name Eva Marie Turner was written in block letters, the way children print when they're still learning to trust their own handwriting. I wondered if she'd cried when she wrote it. I wondered if she'd felt relief or regret. I wondered if I would ever know. I called my Aunt Margaret that afternoon, the only sister my mother ever really spoke to. She answered on the third ring, her voice brittle and tired. I could hear the TV in the background, one of those daytime court shows she loved. "Aunt Margaret, it's me," I said. She sighed. "I was wondering when you'd call." There was a long silence, the kind that fills up with things unsaid. Finally, she spoke. "Your mother was complicated. She loved you in the only way she knew how." "Did you know about Eva?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Another pause. I did. She made me promise never to tell. She said she'd handle it her way. Her voice broke. I'm so sorry, sweetheart. I pressed my palm to my eyes, trying not to cry. Why would she keep it from me? Why lie? Aunt Margaret's answer was so soft, I almost didn't catch it. Because she was ashamed. Because she wanted to protect you. Because she was afraid you'd stop loving her if you knew. I wanted to argue, to shout, but instead, I just listened as she told me about my mother at 19, pregnant and terrified, sent away to a home for unwed mothers in the next county. How she'd never spoken of it again, not even when the family gathered for holidays, and Eva's name hovered like smoke over the table. How she'd buried it so deep that she'd almost convinced herself it hadn't happened. I hung up, feeling hollowed out, like someone had scraped me clean from the inside. I wanted to be angry at my mother, but all I felt was grief. Grief for the girl she'd been, for the woman she became, for the sister I never knew. The next week crawled by in a haze of casseroles and condolences. People kept dropping by with food and awkward silences, unsure of what to say to the daughter who hadn't really known her mother at all. I caught snippets of their conversations. Such a shame. I always wondered why she was so private. Blood will tell? And each one felt like a fresh cut. Eva kept her distance for a few days. I think she sensed I needed space. But one Thursday morning, she called me out of the blue. Her voice was steadier than mine. Would you like to meet my family? She asked. I have a daughter. Her name is Tessa. She's 13. Something inside me softened. I'd like that, I said. I drove to her apartment that Saturday, hands sweating on the steering wheel. Tessa answered the door, all elbows and braces and nervous energy. She looked at me with wide, searching eyes, as if trying to find a piece of herself in my face. Eva made tea and set out a plate of cookies. We sat around the kitchen table, awkward at first, but then something shifted. Tessa asked about my childhood, what games I played, what I wanted to be when I grew up. I told her about summer afternoons on my grandmother's porch, about the way my mother would sing old Patsy Cline songs when she thought no one was listening. Tessa listened, rapt, her chin propped on her hand. When Eva excused herself to take a phone call, Tessa leaned closer to me. Did you know about us? She whispered. I shook my head. No, sweetie, I just found out. She looked so small, so vulnerable. I always wished I had a bigger family, she said. It was just me and Mom. My grandma died when I was little. I reached for her hand without thinking. Well, you've got me now, I said. If you want me. She grinned. I want you. For the first time in weeks, I felt something like hope flicker in my chest. After I left, Ava texted me. Thank you for being kind to her, for being here. I stared at her message for a long time, unsure of how to reply. In the end, I just wrote back, thank you for letting me in. But the peace was short-lived. The town was still talking. Rumors grew, twisted, and multiplied. Someone wrote an anonymous letter to the local paper, claiming my mother had led a double life, that she'd abandoned one daughter for another, that she was not the woman everyone thought she was. The letter ran in the weekly column, sandwiched between lost pet ads and church announcements. I felt humiliated, exposed. I wanted to hide, to pretend none of it mattered. But it did. It mattered because it was my story now, whether I wanted it or not. My phone rang off the hook that day. Friends, old classmates, even my boss at the library. Everyone wanted to know if it was true. Everyone wanted a piece of my pain. I called Eva. Her voice was tight. I'm sorry, she said. I never wanted this for you. It's not your fault, I said, but I could hear the exhaustion in my own voice. We met at the park that evening, sitting on a bench while the sun set behind the swings. Ava watched the kids play, her hands twisting in her lap. "I keep thinking if I'd just kept quiet, none of this would have happened," she said. I shook my head. The truth was always going to come out. My mother made her choices. Now we have to make ours. She looked at me, eyes shining. "Do you hate her? For what she did to us?" I thought about it. Really thought. "I don't know," I said. "I think I hate that she was so afraid. I wish she'd trusted us enough to tell the truth." Ava nodded. "Me too." We sat in silence, the air thick with all the things we couldn't change. That night, I found myself digging through my mother's things again. I found her old journals, hidden in the back of her closet. Most of the pages were filled with grocery lists and complaints about the weather. But here and there, I found scraps of something raw. Entries about loneliness, about regret, about a daughter she lost and a daughter she kept. One entry stopped me cold. "I see her sometimes in dreams. A little girl with dark hair and sad eyes. I wonder if she forgives me. I wonder if I will ever forgive myself." I closed the journal, my hands shaking. My mother had carried this shame her whole life. She'd loved us both, in her own broken way. I decided I couldn't let her story end in whispers and shame. I needed to speak. The next Sunday, I stood up in church during the announcements. My heart pounded so hard I thought I might faint. I cleared my throat, and the room fell silent. "My mother kept a secret her whole life," I said. "She gave up a daughter when she was young. I only learned about it after she passed. I want you to know that I'm proud to have a sister. I'm proud to know her. My mother did her best. We all do. I hope you'll remember her with kindness." For a moment, no one spoke. Then Mrs. Fields, who'd known my mother since they were girls, stood and hugged me. Others followed. It wasn't forgiveness, not exactly, but it was something like grace. Afterwards, Eva squeezed my hand. "Thank you," she whispered, "for seeing me." We walked out of the church together, sunlight on our faces, our mother's secret finally out in the open. But the story wasn't finished. Not by a long shot. The next morning, I woke with a rare sense of clarity, as if standing in that church and naming the truth had shaken something loose inside me. But it didn't take long for the reality of living with an exposed secret to settle in. Small towns have a way of forgiving in public and dissecting in private. I noticed it first in the grocery store, when Mrs. Carver nodded politely but didn't stop to chat. Then, at the post office, where Mr. Field's wife pretended not to see me at all, keeping her eyes glued to the rack of greeting cards. It hurt, more than I wanted to admit. For years, I'd been the one people called for casseroles after surgery, for rides to the airport, for an extra hand at the church bazaar. Now there was a thin film of suspicion between me and everyone else, and I didn't know how to scrub it away. Eva was feeling it too. She texted me late that night, a string of words that sounded so small and scared. "Do you think it will ever go back to normal?" I told her I didn't know, that I hoped so. But hope felt like a fragile thing, easily broken by a sideways glance or a closed door. I tried to distract myself with work. The library was quiet, even more so since the letter in the paper. People kept their distance, borrowing books through the self-checkout, their voices hushed. My boss, Mrs. Avery, called me into her office on Wednesday. She shut the door and folded her hands on her desk. "I'm sorry about what you've been through," she said, her face pinched with concern. "I just want you to know that if you need time, or if you want to step back for a while, we understand." I stared at her, stunned. Was this pity? Or was it something else? A gentle nudge out the door? I forced a smile. "Thank you, but I'm fine, really." She looked relieved, but I saw the flicker of doubt in her eyes. I left her office feeling smaller than ever. That night, Eva invited me to dinner. She was quiet, distracted, picking at her food. Tessa tried to fill the silence, chattering about a science project at school and a boy who kept stealing her pencils. I watched Eva, saw the way her shoulders hunched, the way her eyes slid away from mine. After Tessa went to her room, Eva finally spoke. "I got a letter today, from my adoptive mother." I tensed. "What did it say?" Eva hesitated, then recited it from memory, her voice flat. "I heard about what happened in your town. I wish you'd never gone looking for them. Some things are better left alone. Please don't involve me in this anymore." I reached for her hand, but she pulled away. "She's never understood. She thinks love is something you ration, like sugar in the war. She never wanted to share me." I saw the hurt in her eyes, the old wound reopened. "I'm so sorry," I said. "You didn't do anything wrong?" She shook her head. "Sometimes I wonder if I did, if maybe I should have just let it go." I wanted to tell her that none of this was her fault, that she deserved answers, that every person deserves to know where they come from. But the words felt thin, insubstantial, like they'd blow away in the next breeze. Later, as I drove home, I thought about my own daughter, Lila, away at college. I'd tried to protect her from every hurt, every shadow. But secrets have a way of finding the light, whether we're ready or not. The next week, the pain shifted from whispers to something sharper. I came home one afternoon to find my garage door spray painted with the word liar. My breath caught in my throat. I stood there for a long time, staring at the dripping letters, my hands shaking. Someone wanted to punish me for my mother's secrets. I called the police. Officer Ramirez arrived, took photos, asked gentle questions. He tried to sound reassuring, but I could tell he didn't expect much. "Probably just a kid," he said. "These things blow over." I nodded, but I didn't believe him. Eva was furious when she heard. She wanted to call the paper, to confront the town. I told her it would only make things worse, that people here don't like their dirty laundry flapping in the breeze. But she didn't listen. The next day, she posted a long message on the town's Facebook group. She wrote about adoption, about secrets, about the pain of growing up without answers. She wrote about forgiveness, about the family she'd found, and about the hate she'd experienced since coming forward. People reacted quickly. Some offered sympathy. Others were cruel, calling her attention-seeking, blaming her for dragging up the past. It was ugly, and it was public, and for a while, I wished I could disappear. But something else happened too. A few women messaged me privately. Women I barely knew, women who'd lived in the town their whole lives. They told me their own stories. A child lost to adoption, a sister who ran away, a father who left and never came back. They told me how hard it was to live with secrets, how freeing it felt to finally speak. I started to realize that my mother's story wasn't unique. She'd just been better at hiding her wounds. One night, I got a call from the local news station. A reporter named Allison wanted to interview Eva and me for a segment on family secrets and small-town stigma. My first instinct was to say no. I didn't want any more eyes on us, but Eva was adamant. "We can't let them control the story," she said. "We need to tell it ourselves." So we agreed. The station sent a camera crew to my house. They set up in the living room, rearranging furniture, testing microphones. The reporter asked us to sit side by side on the couch. I could feel Eva trembling next to me. The questions started simple. How did we find each other? What was it like to discover we were sisters? But then Allison leaned forward, her eyes kind. "What would you say to your mother now, if you could?" For a moment, I couldn't speak. My throat closed up. But then I heard my own voice, shaky but clear. I'd tell her I love her, that I wish she hadn't been so afraid, that secrets don't protect us, they just make us lonely. Eva squeezed my hand, and I saw tears running down her cheeks. I'd tell her I forgive her, she said. I forgive her for not choosing me. I forgive her for being scared. I forgive her because I know now what it's like to want to protect your child, even if it means breaking your own heart. The segment aired the following week. People watched. People talked. Some of the comments were cruel, but some were unexpectedly kind. Mrs. Fields stopped me in the grocery store and hugged me so tightly I could barely breathe. Mr. Fields' wife left a pie on my doorstep with a note that simply said, "I'm sorry." It wasn't a full redemption, but it was something. But not everyone was ready to move on. At the next town council meeting, a man stood up and demanded to know why the scandal had to be aired on television. "It's bad for business," he said. "Makes us look like a bunch of degenerates." I stood, my knees knocking together, and faced him. "I'm not ashamed," I said. "And neither should anyone else be. My mother was a good woman who made a hard choice. We all have secrets. That doesn't make us bad people." The room was silent. Then someone clapped. Then another. The sound grew, awkward at first, then stronger. I walked out of that meeting with my head high, Ava beside me. For the first time, I felt proud, not just of my mother or Eva, but of myself. But I knew the hardest part was yet to come. In the days after the council meeting, the air in town changed, almost imperceptibly. I noticed it in the way people paused before speaking to me, in the looks that lingered a little too long. There was curiosity now, yes, but something else too, a cautious respect, or maybe just the relief that someone else's secrets had come to light first. For once, I wasn't the one shouldering the shame in silence. Eva and I started meeting for coffee every Saturday at the little bakery on Main. At first, we sat in the corner, backs to the window, lowering our voices so the other patrons wouldn't overhear. But as the weeks passed, we stopped caring. We let our laughter ring out, let our stories spill across the table along with the crumbs and spilled sugar. People began to greet us again, some shyly, some with a boldness that seemed new. The wall between us and the town was crumbling, brick by careful brick. One rainy afternoon, Eva brought Tessa along. Tessa sat quietly, headphones around her neck, tapping her fingers on her jeans. She watched us closely, like she was trying to memorize the lines of our faces, the cadence of our voices. When Eva excused herself to take a call, Tessa leaned in. "Do you think we're weird?" she asked, her voice so soft I almost missed it. I smiled. "I think we're strong, and strong people sometimes look weird to others." She grinned, relief flickering in her eyes. "I like having an aunt. I always wanted a bigger family." I felt something warm uncurl in my chest. "I like having a niece. You can always call me, about anything." She nodded, her face serious. "I will." Later, as I watched the rain streak down the bakery window, I realized how much I wanted to protect her, to shelter her from the scrutiny and the whispers. I'd seen firsthand how secrets could poison a family, could trickle down through generations like a slow leak. I didn't want that for Tessa, or for Lila, or for Eva. I wanted something cleaner, more honest. But honesty is complicated. One evening, as I was sorting through another box of my mother's papers, I found something I hadn't expected, a stack of letters bound together with a faded blue ribbon. The handwriting on the envelopes was unfamiliar, looping, and elegant. I untied the ribbon with trembling fingers and slid out the first letter. It was dated July 1977, just a few weeks after Eva's birth. The writer was a woman named Dorothy Foster. The tone was gentle, almost pleading. She wrote about the adoption, about her hope that my mother would find peace, about the promise she'd made to love Eva as her own. She signed it, "With gratitude and hope, Dorothy." I sifted through the rest. Each letter was a small window into the years I'd never known. Dorothy wrote about Eva's first words, her first steps, her favorite book. She included photographs. Eva as a toddler, grinning in a frilly dress. Eva at 6, missing her front teeth. Eva on her first day of kindergarten. Each note ended with a gentle question. Would you like to meet her someday? Would you like to write back? There were no replies. My mother had kept every letter, every photo, but had never written back. I sat there on the floor, surrounded by evidence of a life parallel to my own. I thought about the woman who'd raised Eva, who'd offered my mother a bridge she'd never dared cross. I wondered what it cost Dorothy to reach out again and again, never to receive an answer. I called Eva that night, my voice unsteady. I found something, I told her. Letters from your mother, the one who raised you. There was a long silence. She told me she tried to contact my birth mother, but I never believed her. I thought she just wanted me to stop asking questions. She tried, I said softly. She tried so hard. Eva came over right away. We sat at my kitchen table, the letters and photographs spread out before us. She read each one, her hands shaking. Tears slid silently down her cheeks, but she didn't wipe them away. She loved me, Eva whispered, her voice raw. Even when I was impossible, even when I kept searching for my real family. She was your real family, I said. You just had more than one. Eva looked at me then, gratitude and sorrow mingling in her eyes. Do you think my mom would want these back? The letters, I mean? I thought about Dorothy, about the courage it must have taken to write those letters. Maybe she would. Maybe it would mean a lot. Eva nodded, resolve hardening her features. I'm going to see her. I haven't visited in years. Not since I found out about Mom. A week later, Eva made the trip. She asked me to come, but I knew this was something she needed to do alone. She called me afterwards, her voice lighter than I'd ever heard it. She cried, Eva said. We both did. I gave her the letters. She said she always hoped I'd understand, one day, why she did what she did. She wanted to protect me. But she said she's proud of me for searching, for wanting the truth. I felt a strange relief, as if some ancient knot had finally loosened. Meanwhile, things in town continued to shift. The local paper ran a follow-up piece, this time focusing on forgiveness and the strength of women who choose to speak. They quoted my words from the council meeting. My mother was a good woman who made a hard choice. I clipped out the article and tucked it into my journal. But there was still one person I hadn't spoken to. Lila. My own daughter, the one I'd tried so hard to shield from all of this. She hadn't come home since the funeral, calling only to check in, her voice bright and hurried. I knew she was avoiding me, afraid of what she might hear. Finally, I called her late one evening. She answered on the second ring. Hey, Mom, she said, sounding tired. Hey, baby, can we talk? There was a pause. About Grandma? About everything, I said. Lila sighed. It's weird. Everyone at school saw the news piece. Some people said I was brave, others just stared. I closed my eyes, pain prickling behind them. I'm sorry. I never wanted you to be in the middle of this. She was quiet for a moment. Did you know? About Eva? No, I said softly. I had no idea. Would you have wanted to know? The question hung in the air. I thought about my mother, about her secrets, about the way shame had shaped her life, and mine. Yes, I said finally. I would have wanted to know. I think it would have made me a better daughter, a better mother maybe. Lila's voice was softer now. I miss Grandma, even if she was hard sometimes. I miss her too, I whispered. We talked for a while, skirting around the pain, circling back to memories that made us both laugh. Before we hung up, Lila said, I want to meet Eva and Tessa. Maybe over spring break? I felt hope bloom again. I'd like that. I think they would too. As I hung up, I realized the story wasn't just about secrets and shame. It was about the ways we reach for each other, even when we're hurt. It was about the possibility of repair. But there was one more wound that needed tending. A few days later, I received a letter in the mail. The handwriting was familiar, blocky, careful. It was from Mrs. Avery, my boss at the library. She wrote, I'm sorry if I made you feel unwelcome. I realize now how hard it must have been to keep coming to work, to keep showing up when everyone was watching. The board wants to honor your mother's years of service with a memorial reading room. I hope you'll help us design it. I pressed the letter to my chest, tears stinging my eyes. My mother's story would have a place in this town, not as a scandal, but as a legacy. I called Eva right away. I want you to be part of it, I told her. You're her daughter too. Eva was quiet, but I could hear the tears in her voice. Thank you, she said. I'd like that. We began to plan, the two of us, building something new out of the ruins. We gathered photographs, favorite books, old letters. We wrote a plaque together. In honor of Margaret Turner, who believed in the power of stories and the women who live them. As we worked, I felt a sense of peace settle over me. I knew the whispers would never fully stop. But I also knew that secrets lose their power when spoken aloud. Still, the public confrontation that would test us most was yet to come. The weeks that followed felt like a slow thaw, the grip of winter loosening from the ground and from our lives. Eva and I met more often, no longer just to nurse wounds, but to start building something honest. We planned the library memorial for our mother, gathering up pieces of her life, her favorite novels, old photographs, even her recipe for cherry cobbler that she'd scribbled on a yellowing index card. For the first time, it felt like we were writing her story ourselves, not letting others define her by a single, hidden chapter. But the town's unease lingered beneath the surface. The council meeting, the news interview, the Facebook post, they'd started a conversation, but they hadn't ended it. I saw it in the way some people crossed the street to avoid me, and in the guarded way Mrs. Carver asked if I'd be bringing the other daughter to the memorial. Her voice was careful, but the words pricked. I wanted to believe things would keep getting easier, but then came the invitation that changed everything. The town's annual Founders' Day festival was coming up, a week of parades, speeches, and enough nostalgia to choke a horse. This year, the festival committee wanted to dedicate the memorial reading room as part of the opening ceremony, in front of the whole town. At first, I felt proud. Then the anxiety crept in. I knew what it meant. A chance for healing, yes, but also a stage for every old wound to be prodded. I called Eva, my voice shaky. They want us to speak, both of us, in front of everyone. Eva was quiet for a long moment. Do you want to? I closed my eyes, picturing the faces in the crowd, the people who judged us, pitied us, even threatened us. I think we need to. If we don't claim this, someone else will. She agreed. Let's do it together. The weeks leading up to the festival were a blur of preparations. Lila came home from college to help, her arms open, her heart cautious but curious. She met Eva and Tessa for the first time at my house, bringing a tray of brownies and the same uncertain smile she'd worn as a child on the first day of school. There was a moment of awkward silence. Then Tessa blurted, "You look like my mom." Lila laughed, and just like that, the ice broke. The girls disappeared into Lila's room, giggling, comparing playlists and horror stories about their mothers. I watched them, hope swelling in my chest. Maybe this wouldn't just heal the past. Maybe it could shape something better for the future. But the town was restless. On the morning of the festival, I found a note tucked under my windshield wiper. The handwriting was jagged, angry. Some secrets should stay buried. Don't ruin our town with your shame. My hands shook as I read it, but I refused to let fear decide my actions. I called Eva. She met me on Main Street, wearing her best dress and a look of quiet determination. "Let them come," she said. "We've got nothing left to hide." We arrived early at the library, setting up the display in the new reading room. The sunlight poured through the windows, illuminating the photographs of our mother. One of her as a girl on a swing, another as a young woman holding a book, and one I'd never seen before. My mother and Eva's adoptive mother, Dorothy, standing side by side, both smiling, both holding baby Eva. I stared at the photograph, a lump rising in my throat. "Did you know about this?" I asked Eva. She shook her head. "No, I can't believe it. They must have met, at least once." It hit me then. How much of our story had been shaped by moments we never witnessed, by choices made in private and carried in silence. I thought about my mother's journals, her hidden sorrow, and how she'd tried, in her own way, to keep both her daughters safe from judgment. The ceremony began with the usual fanfare: marching band, speeches about heritage, a prayer for rain. Then, the mayor called Eva and me to the podium. My heart hammered in my chest as I looked out at the crowd. Faces I'd known my whole life, faces that had turned cold, faces that had softened. I saw Lila and Tessa in the front row, holding hands. I stepped up to the microphone, my hands trembling. I took a deep breath. My mother, Margaret Turner, believed in stories. She believed in the power of words to heal, to connect, to reveal who we really are. She wasn't perfect. She made hard choices. Some of those choices hurt people, including those she loved most. But she also loved fiercely, and she wanted the best for her daughters, even when it meant living with regret. I paused, looking over at Eva. She nodded, her eyes shining. Eva stepped forward. Her voice was clear, steady. "I'm Eva. I was adopted as a baby, and I spent years searching for where I came from. I found a mother who was gone, but I also found a sister. I found family. I found forgiveness. This reading room is for all of us who've ever wondered where we belong. For everyone who's carried a secret or lived with a wound. My mother's story is part of this town's story now. So is mine. So is my sister's. And I'm proud of that." There was a silence, heavy and full. Then, slowly, people began to clap. Not everyone, but enough. Lila was crying, her hands over her mouth. Tessa was grinning, clapping until her palms were red. The mayor presented us with a plaque. The librarian, Mrs. Avery, hugged us both. For a moment, the years of shame and fear felt small, like shadows at noon. But as the crowd began to disperse, I saw Mrs. Carver standing off to the side, arms crossed, eyes cold. She didn't clap, she didn't smile, she just watched. Afterwards, as we mingled among the townspeople, people approached us with tentative words, some apologies, some awkward attempts at kindness. One older man said, "I knew your mother when we were kids. She was always stubborn as a mule. She'd be proud of you girls." I smiled, the words washing over me like a benediction. But not everyone was ready to let go. That night, as the fireworks exploded over the fairgrounds, Eva and I sat on the library steps, exhaustion heavy in our bones. "Do you think it'll ever be over?" Eva asked. I looked up at the sky, at the bursts of color lighting up the darkness. "I don't know. Maybe it's not supposed to be over. Maybe it's just supposed to get lighter, a little at a time. She nodded, wiping a tear from her cheek. I'm glad I found you. I reached for her hand. Me too. Just then, Lila and Tessa came running up, breathless and giddy from the carnival rides. Tessa threw her arms around Eva, and Lila leaned against me, her head on my shoulder. For the first time, I felt the weight of the past begin to lift. Maybe not gone, but lighter. But life has a way of testing you just when you think you've found peace. A week later, Mrs. Carver showed up at my house, her lips pressed tight, holding an envelope. You should see this, she said, thrusting it into my hands. I thought you ought to know what your mother really did. Inside was an old letter, addressed to my mother, written by Dorothy Foster. It was angry, desperate, accusing my mother of breaking a promise to stay in touch, to visit Eva, to be part of her life. The words stung. You said you would come. Eva waited. You never showed up. My knees went weak. I sat on the porch steps, reading and rereading the letter. My mother had promised, and then she'd vanished. All the stories she'd told me about having no choice, about being forced to give Eva up, were only half the truth. She could have been there. She chose not to be. For the first time, I felt anger flare in my chest, not just at the town or the gossip, but at my own mother. I called Eva, my voice shaking. I need to see you, now. She came over, her face tense with worry. I handed her the letter. She read it in silence, her jaw clenched. She promised, Eva said, her voice breaking. She promised me. I used to sit on the porch every Sunday, thinking she'd come. I felt sick. I didn't know. I'm so sorry. She shook her head, wiping away tears. It's not your fault, but I need to know why. I need to hear it from someone who was there. That night, we made a plan. We would visit Dorothy Foster together. We would ask her to tell us the truth, all of it. No more secrets, no more silence. The drive to Dorothy Foster's house felt longer than it was, the miles stretching out beneath a heavy sky. Eva sat beside me, twisting her hands in her lap, her silence loud with expectation and dread. I glanced at her now and then, remembering the little girl in the photographs, her eyes searching, her smile uncertain. I wondered how many car rides she'd taken as a child, hoping they'd lead to the answers she needed. Today, at least, she wouldn't have to do it alone. Dorothy lived just outside town, in a cottage with peeling blue shutters and a riot of wildflowers blooming along the walk. Eva hesitated on the porch, her hand hovering over the doorbell. I covered her hand with mine and pressed the bell. We waited. I heard footsteps, then the door creaked open. Dorothy stood there, older than I'd pictured, her hair a silver cloud, her eyes sharp and wary. For a moment, no one spoke. Then Eva's voice cracked the silence. Hi, Mom. Dorothy's mouth trembled. Eva, oh, honey. She opened her arms, and Eva fell into them, sobs shaking her shoulders. I looked away, suddenly aware of the boundary between witness and participant. But Dorothy reached out, pulling me into the embrace. For a moment, we stood together, three women bound by loss and longing. Inside, Dorothy made tea, bustling around the kitchen with nervous energy. The walls were lined with photographs. Eva at every age, school portraits, graduation, a wedding I'd never attended. I wondered if my mother's face had ever appeared on these walls, or if she'd lived only in Dorothy's letters and memories. We sat at the table, hands wrapped around steaming mugs. Dorothy looked at Eva, her eyes searching. It's been a long time, sweetheart. Eva nodded, her voice small. I know, I'm sorry. Dorothy shook her head. You have nothing to be sorry for. I always hoped you'd come back. She looked at me then, curiosity flickering in her gaze. And you must be her sister. I nodded. I'm Anna. Dorothy smiled, but her eyes were wary. You look like your mother. Both of you do. There was a pause, heavy with all the words unsaid. Finally, Eva slid the old letter across the table. Did you mean this? She asked, her voice trembling. Did my birth mother really promise to come back? Dorothy's face softened with grief. She touched the letter with gentle fingers, as if it were a relic. She did. I remember the day she left. She held you and cried, and promised she'd visit. I believed her. I think, at the time, she believed herself. I swallowed the knot in my throat. Do you know why she never came? Dorothy sighed, looking down at her tea. It wasn't easy back then. There was so much shame. Her family wanted it all swept under the rug. She wrote a few times, asking about Eva, but then the letters stopped. I tried to reach her, but your grandmother wrote me, told me to stop interfering. After a while, I realized Margaret, your mother, was trying to move on. She couldn't face what she'd done. Or maybe she was just too scared to open that door again. Eva's eyes filled with tears. I used to wait for her. Every birthday, every holiday, I'd hope she'd show up. Dorothy reached across the table, taking Eva's hand. I know, baby. I'm sorry. I tried to fill that hole, but I couldn't. Not really. I felt a pang of guilt for all the years I'd had with my mother. Years Eva spent wondering, waiting. She kept your letters, I said softly. All of them. She never threw them away. Dorothy's eyes widened, surprise and sorrow mingling. I didn't know. I thought she'd forgotten us. She never did, I said. She couldn't face it. We sat in silence, each of us nursing our own wounds. Finally, Dorothy spoke, her voice steady. You girls deserved better. Margaret did too, in her way. The world was hard on women like her. Hard on all of us. Eva nodded, her hand tightening on Dorothy's. I forgive her. I think I do. But I still wish she'd come back, even once. Dorothy smiled through her tears. That's the thing about forgiveness, honey. Sometimes you have to give it even when you never get an apology. I looked at Eva, saw her shoulders relax, the lines of pain softening around her eyes. I realized that coming here hadn't given us answers so much as permission to grieve, to forgive, to start again. Before we left, Dorothy pressed an old photograph into Eva's hand. It was the three of them, my mother, Dorothy, and baby Eva, taken on the day of the adoption. My mother's eyes were red, but her arms held Eva fiercely, as if she knew she'd never hold her again. Eva traced the photo with her thumb, tears slipping down her cheeks. Thank you, she whispered. Dorothy hugged us both at the door. You're always welcome here, both of you. Family is what you make it. On the drive home, Eva was quiet, lost in thought. Finally, she spoke. I needed that. I needed to hear it from her. I nodded. I think your mom, our mom, did the best she could. But it wasn't enough. Not for you, not for her. Eva looked out the window, the late afternoon sun painting gold on her face. I think I can let it go now. Not forget, but let it go. I reached over, squeezed her hand. Me too. Back in town, news of our visit to Dorothy spread faster than I would have thought possible. By the next day, people were already whispering, some kind, some not. Mrs. Carver stopped me at the grocery store, her voice softer than before. I heard you went to see the other mother. That was brave. I smiled, too tired for bitterness. It was necessary. She nodded, and for the first time, I thought I saw something like understanding in her eyes. But not everyone was ready to move on. A few days later, the library board called a special meeting. Mrs. Avery met me at the door, her expression pinched. They want to discuss the memorial. Some people are saying it's not appropriate, that it's glorifying your mother's mistakes. My stomach clenched. What does that mean? She shook her head. I don't know, but they want you and Eva there, tomorrow night. I called Eva, my voice tight with fear and anger. They want to take it away, the reading room. They want to erase her again. Eva's voice was steel. We won't let them. That night, I barely slept. I lay awake, thinking of all the ways women's stories get silenced. By shame, by fear, by people who think they know best. I thought about my mother, about Dorothy, about Eva, about the cost of silence. The night of the board meeting, the library was packed. More people than I'd ever seen at a board meeting crowded into the reading room, their faces tense with expectation. Mrs. Avery called the meeting to order, her voice trembling. A woman I recognized from church stood up, her voice clipped and cold. I don't think it's right to honor someone who lied and abandoned her own child. What kind of message does that send to our children? There were murmurs of agreement. My cheeks burned with shame and fury. I stood, my heart pounding. My mother was not perfect. She made mistakes. She was scared, and she let that fear guide her. But she also worked in this library for 30 years. She taught generations of children to read. She gave what she could, even when she was broken herself. If we can't honor the whole person, then what are we even doing here? Eva stood beside me, her voice shaking but strong. I spent my whole life searching for the truth. I found pain, yes, but I also found love. Family, forgiveness. This room isn't about erasing mistakes. It's about telling the whole story. About letting people see that even broken families can heal. There was a long silence. Then Mrs. Avery spoke, her voice clear. I think we've heard enough. Let's vote. Hands went up, one by one. For a moment, I couldn't breathe. The reading room stayed, by a single vote. When the meeting ended, people came up to us, some with tears, some with stiff nods. One woman, a stranger, hugged Eva and whispered, Thank you for speaking. My mother was like yours. That night, Eva and I sat in the reading room long after everyone had gone. The sunlight slanted through the windows, illuminating the photographs, the books, the plaque with our mother's name. We did it, Eva said, her voice barely above a whisper. I nodded, tears slipping down my cheeks. We did. But even as relief settled in my bones, I knew our story wasn't over. There were still scars to tend, bridges to rebuild, forgiveness to find. And just when I thought the past had finally released its hold, something else arrived to test us both. The quiet that followed the board meeting was uneasy, like the hush after a storm when you're not sure if the sky is clearing or just catching its breath. For a few days, Eva and I tried to settle back into the gentle routines we'd begun to build. Coffee at the bakery, long walks on the greenway, little dinners with our girls that felt almost like peace. But underneath, I could sense that something was still shifting. Some piece of the past not quite done with us yet. Then, on a Saturday morning, I opened my mailbox and found a small, heavy envelope addressed to me in a hand I didn't recognize. I stood on the porch, heart thudding, and opened it with trembling fingers. Inside were two things. The first was a faded photograph. A young woman with sharp cheekbones and solemn eyes standing in front of a courthouse, a tiny baby in her arms. My mother and Eva. The second was a letter, written in the same unfamiliar hand. I sat down right there on the steps, knees weak, and began to read. The letter was from a woman named Mavis Jennings. She wrote that she'd been a friend to my mother during her time at the home for unwed mothers. She'd helped my mother through her pregnancy, had even been there the day Eva was born. She described the way my mother had cried when she signed the adoption papers, the way she'd clung to Eva and whispered, "I'll always love you, even if you never know me." Mavis wrote, "Your mother was so scared. The world didn't give her many choices. But she talked about you, her first daughter, almost every day. She worried you'd grow up resenting her, or worse, repeating her mistakes. She didn't want her shame to become your inheritance." The letter ended with a kind of blessing. "Secrets hurt, but so does silence. I hope you find peace, both of you. Margaret loved you in all her broken ways." I pressed the letter to my heart and let myself cry. Tears for my mother, for Eva, for the girl I'd been who never knew how much fear and love could live side by side. I called Eva and read the letter to her over the phone. She listened in silence, then whispered, "I wish I could have met her. I wish I could have told her I forgave her." "We're doing it now," I said. "Every day we choose to move forward, we're forgiving her." But the letter stirred something else in me, something unresolved. There were still questions about my mother's time at that home, questions that had always been brushed aside, turned into family legend, or buried beneath shame. I decided I needed to see the place for myself, to walk the halls where my mother's story had changed forever. I asked Eva to come with me. She agreed without hesitation. The drive to the old county home was quiet, the highway lined with the last gold leaves of autumn. The building was still there, red brick, a little sagging around the edges, now converted into offices for social services. As we stood on the cracked walkway, I tried to picture my mother as a frightened teenager, her future shrinking with every day she spent inside. A kind receptionist listened to our story and nodded. "You're not the first," she said. "We get women here sometimes, looking for pieces of themselves." She led us into a small records room filled with old files and ledgers. We searched for hours, sifting through dust and faded ink. Finally, Eva found it, a thin folder with our mother's name, Margaret Turner. There were forms, signatures, a medical record, and a single page torn from a notebook. The page was a letter never sent, addressed simply, "To my girls." My hands shook as I read it aloud. "If you ever find this, I hope you understand that I loved you both. I made choices I can't take back. I wish I'd been braver. I wish I'd known how to be a mother to you both. I hope you can forgive me, and I hope you'll forgive yourselves for all the things you never knew. Love, Mom." Eva was crying openly now, shoulders shaking. I wrapped my arms around her, and we stood together, two grown women clinging to each other, orphans of the same secret. When we left the building, the sun was setting, casting the world in rose and gold. Eva squeezed my hand. "I feel like she was speaking to us somehow, like she wanted us to find this." I nodded. "Maybe that's why the past keeps coming back. Maybe we have to keep listening until it's all been heard." In the days that followed, I felt lighter, as if some final piece had clicked into place. But not everyone saw it that way. The town's old wounds still ran deep. At the grocery store, Mrs. Carver cornered me again, her face set in grim lines. "You think you know everything now, don't you? Just because you found some letters?" I met her gaze, tired but firm. "I don't know everything, but I know enough to stop being ashamed." She sniffed, but her anger seemed smaller now, almost sad. "We all have things we wish we could forget," she said, then walked away. It struck me then that for some people, the pain wasn't just about my family's secret, it was about their own. Maybe my mother's story was just a mirror they didn't want to look into. Eva and I began to share what we'd found, not just with each other, but with anyone who needed to hear it. We organized a talk at the library, inviting women from the community to come and share their own stories of loss, secrecy, and survival. The turnout surprised us. The reading room was full of women, young, old, mothers, daughters, each carrying her own private ache. One woman spoke about giving up a child for adoption in the 70s and never being able to talk about it. Another talked about growing up with a father who never mentioned the family he'd left behind. The air in the room was thick with sorrow, but also with relief. Relief at finally naming the pain, at not being alone. I spoke last. I told them about my mother, about Eva, about how secrets grow heavier in the dark and lighter when they're shared. I saw tears in the eyes of women I'd known for decades, women I'd thought had lived perfect, simple lives. I realized then that none of us are as alone as we think. After the event, Mrs. Avery hugged me, whispering, "You did something good tonight. Your mother would be proud." That night, Eva and I sat on the library steps again, the town quiet around us. "Do you think she'd really be proud?" Eva asked. I looked up at the stars, feeling the ache of missing her, but also a strange gratitude. "I think she'd be relieved. I think she'd finally feel free." Eva nodded, and we sat there together, silent but not alone. But just as I began to believe that peace had finally found us, another ripple from the past came. This time, not from old letters or whispered rumors, but from someone I never expected. One afternoon, I came home to find Layla sitting on my porch steps, her eyes red from crying. In her hands, she held a manila envelope. "Mom, I got something at school," she said, her voice shaking. Inside were printouts of the news articles about our family, copies of the town's cruelest Facebook comments, even the anonymous letter that had been slipped under my windshield. Someone had mailed them to Lila's dorm, no return address. She looked at me, her face crumpling. "Why would someone do this? Why can't they just leave us alone?" I pulled her close, heartbreaking for her all over again. "Some people are afraid of what they don't understand," I said softly. "But you don't have to carry this. Not anymore." That night, as I held my daughter and listened to her cry, I understood that the battle wasn't just for my mother or Eva. It was for Lila, for Tessa, for every girl growing up with the weight of someone else's shame. I promised myself, and her, that the cycle would stop with me. But I also knew that sometimes you have to fight for peace. And I was ready. After everything we'd been through, the secrets, the letters, the uneasy forgiveness, I thought I was prepared for any fresh wave of judgment. But seeing Lila crushed by that envelope of malice, I realized how naive I'd been. Pain, when it's recycled and readdressed, always finds new ways to wound. Lila stayed home for a few days, her eyes wary and her laughter hesitant. The old confidence I'd tried so hard to nurture in her seemed to have been shaken loose. I watched her drift around the house, headphones on, lost in her own storm. Eva and I spoke daily, strategizing how to respond, but nothing felt right. How do you protect your child from the world's cruelty when that cruelty comes wrapped in your own family's story? On the third day, Lila came into the kitchen, clutching her phone. "They're still talking about us online," she said, voice tight. "Someone started a thread. People from town, even people I don't know. They're saying Grandma was a coward. They're calling you a liar. Someone even said I should be ashamed of my blood." I reached out, but she flinched, wounded. "It doesn't matter what they say," I told her, even though I knew the words were as thin as tissue. She shook her head. "It does matter, Mom. It matters to me." I didn't sleep that night. I sat at the kitchen table, scrolling through the same hateful posts, trying to map each username to a real-life neighbor or classmate. I kept thinking of my mother, wondering if this was what she'd feared. That shame, once loosed, would never return quietly to its cage. The next morning, Lila surprised me. She came downstairs, her hair brushed, eyes red but steady. "I want to say something," she said. "Publicly. I want people to hear from me, not just about me." I hesitated, torn between pride and terror. But I saw the resolve in her face, the same stubbornness I'd inherited from my mother, and she from hers. "If you're sure," I said, "I'll stand with you." Lila posted a long message on her social media. She told the story as she saw it. A family hurt by secrets, but trying to heal. A mother and aunt who chose truth over silence. A grandmother who'd done her best, even if it wasn't enough. She ended with, "I am not ashamed of who I am or where I come from. If you have questions, ask me. But don't try to make me feel small. I am proud of my family. All of it." Within hours, the post spread. Some comments were cruel, but many were supportive. Friends from school messaged her with their own stories of family secrets, of shame and resilience. Even some townspeople, people I never thought would stand up, commented with words of kindness. The truth was out, and now it was Lila's too. Eva called that night, her voice thick with emotion. "She's braver than we ever were at her age," she said. "Maybe this is how it gets better, one generation at a time." But the story wasn't finished. The next week, the library's reading room was scheduled for its official dedication, a final, public reckoning. Eva and I were invited to speak again, this time with Lila and Tessa by our side. The event was to be broadcast live on the town's local TV channel and streamed online for anyone who wanted to watch. The morning of the dedication, the library buzzed with nervous energy. Mrs. Avery greeted us at the door, her hands fluttering like startled birds. "There's already a crowd," she said. "Some folks came just to see if you'd show up." I smiled, steadying myself. "We're here. We're not going anywhere." The reading room itself glowed with sunlight. The plaque shone, and the photographs Eva and I had chosen seemed to watch over us. Lila stood with Tessa in the front row, both girls clutching each other's hands. Dorothy Foster was there too, sitting between Eva and me, her face shining with pride and sorrow. The mayor gave a brief introduction, then handed the microphone to me. The hush in the room was absolute. I looked out over the gathered faces, neighbors, old friends, even Mrs. Carver with her lips pressed into a thin line. I saw Lila, her chin lifted, and I thought of all the ways we'd been told to sit down, to be quiet, to bury the things that made us different. My mother, Margaret Turner, believed in the power of stories. I began, my voice trembling but clear. She taught me that stories can save us, but only if we're brave enough to tell the truth. Today, we honor not just her service to this library, but her struggle, her regrets, her courage, and her love. I looked at Eva, who stepped forward and took the microphone. "I was the secret," she said. "For a long time, I thought that meant I was something to be ashamed of. But secrets only have power when we're alone with them. Today, I'm not alone. I have a sister, a niece, a daughter, and a mother who loved me, even when she couldn't show it. This room is a place for all of us who have ever been hidden, or silenced, or made to feel unworthy. You belong here too." There was a pause, a long, aching silence. Then Lila stepped up. She was shaking, but she spoke anyway. "I'm Lila, and I'm proud to be my mother's daughter. I'm proud to be Eva's niece and Tessa's cousin. I know what it feels like to be judged for something you can't control. But I also know what it means to choose kindness, to choose forgiveness. I hope we all do better, for each other and for ourselves. Tessa nodded, adding simply, Me too. The applause started slow, but soon it filled the room. Even Mrs. Carver clapped, her eyes shining with something like reluctant respect. Afterwards, people lingered, some offering hugs, others just quiet words. Dorothy hugged Eva and me, whispering, You girls did good. Your mother would be proud, both of you. When the crowd thinned, Mrs. Carver approached. Her hands trembled as she handed me a small envelope. Your mother helped me once, a long time ago, she said. She let me borrow books for my son when he was sick. She never told anyone. She was a good woman, even if she was scared. I'm sorry for how I acted. I squeezed her hand. Thank you for telling me. Eva and I sat together in the quiet reading room after everyone had gone. Do you think it's over? She asked. I shook my head. I think it never really ends, but I think we're finally allowed to start again. She smiled, tears slipping down her cheeks. I'm glad I found you. I'm glad we kept going. The next day, a letter arrived for me at the library. It was from Mavis Jennings, the same woman who'd written me before. She said she'd watched the dedication online and wanted to thank us for telling our story so openly. She wrote, You've made it easier for the next woman to speak. That's what courage looks like. I sat in the reading room, sunlight streaming over my hands, and let the words settle inside me. Maybe that was the only kind of legacy that mattered. Not perfection, but honesty. Not silence, but the willingness to speak and to listen. Leela returned to college, steadier, her head held higher. Tessa started writing stories about brave girls who found their way home. Eva and I met for coffee, sometimes in public, sometimes in private, but always as sisters. The town quieted. The whispers faded. And for the first time, I felt the possibility of peace. Not because the past was forgotten, but because we dared to face it together. But as I closed the library one evening, I found one last letter, tucked into a book, unsigned, its message simple. Thank you for telling the truth. You've helped more than you know. I smiled, tucking the note into my bag. I didn't know who had written it, but I knew, finally, that our story belonged not just to us, but to every woman in this town. And that was enough. The days after the dedication felt softer, as if the whole town had exhaled. Lila left for college with a kind of grace I hadn't seen in her for months, promising to come home for Thanksgiving. Promising, most importantly, to call me just to talk, not just to check in. Eva and I fell into a rhythm that felt both old and brand new. Sunday breakfasts at the bakery, walks through the park with Tessa and her dog, afternoons at the library sorting donations for the reading room that now bore our mother's name. It was strange, almost unsettling, how quickly life started to feel ordinary again. I still got the occasional sidelong look at the grocery store, but the stares had softened. The whispers died down. I saw people who once crossed the street to avoid me now stopping to chat, asking about Lila, about Eva, about the reading room. I realized that, in their own way, many of them were trying to make amends, to stitch a little kindness into the frayed fabric of our town. One morning, I found Tessa waiting for me outside the library, a notebook clutched to her chest. She looked nervous, her foot tapping against the pavement. Aunt Anna, can I ask you something? She said, her voice barely above a whisper. Anything, sweetheart? I replied. She hesitated, biting her lip. Do you think I should write about all this? About Grandma and what happened? I was silent for a moment, thinking of all the ways stories can heal and all the ways they can wound. I think you should write what you need to write, I said. It's your story too, Tessa. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise. She nodded, relief in her eyes, and slipped inside, already scribbling in her notebook. Later, Eva and I sat together in the reading room, watching Tessa and a handful of other girls spread out across the tables, their voices hushed, their faces intent. "Do you think they'll ever understand?" Eva asked, her voice soft. I looked at the girls, so young and certain that the world would always be as it was that day. "Maybe not now, but one day, when they have secrets of their own, or scars they think no one else can see, they'll remember. Maybe they'll be braver because of it." Eva nodded, her eyes shining. "I hope so." As autumn deepened, the reading room became a sanctuary for more than just us. Women came in, sometimes alone, sometimes in twos and threes. They'd linger by the photos, run their fingers over the spines of the books, sometimes pausing to write a note in the memory journal we'd left on the table. Some left only a name. Others wrote whole pages, memories of my mother, confessions, apologies, thanks. I read them sometimes late at night, heart aching at the things we keep hidden, the things we finally let go. It was in that same reading room, 2 weeks before Thanksgiving, that Mrs. Carver found me. She'd aged since summer. Her hands shook a little as she held out a slim envelope. "I found something," she said, voice brittle. "It's for you. I should have given it to you a long time ago." Inside was a letter from my grandmother, written years after Eva's adoption, never sent. The paper was yellowed, the ink faded but legible. I unfolded it carefully, hands trembling. "My dearest Margaret," it began. "I hope one day you can forgive me for the decisions I made for you. I thought I was protecting you, and perhaps I was only protecting myself. If you ever find your daughter again, tell her I am sorry. Tell her it was never her fault or yours. Tell her she was always loved, even from a distance." I read the letter twice, then a third time, feeling the words soak into me. I called Ava and read it to her over the phone. She was silent for a long moment. "I think that's the first time anyone ever said it wasn't my fault," she whispered. "It wasn't," I said. "It never was." That night, I sat in my mother's old chair by the window, the letter in my lap, the house quiet. I thought about how pain can echo through generations, how the things our mothers can't say become the things we can't hear, until someone, somewhere, decides to break the silence. The week before Thanksgiving, Lila called. She sounded different, lighter, more sure of herself. "Mom, you'll never believe this," she said, laughter in her voice. "My roommate's mom watched the broadcast from the reading room and called her crying. She told her daughter about a sister she'd given up for adoption when she was a teenager. They're meeting next week. She said it was because of us, because we told the truth." For a long moment, I couldn't speak. When I finally found my voice, it came out shaky. That's everything I hoped for, Lila. Everything." When Thanksgiving arrived, Eva and Tessa came to dinner. Dorothy joined us, bearing a pecan pie and a trembling smile. Lila came home, arms full of laundry and stories, her confidence restored. We crowded around the table, 4 generations of women, all shaped by one woman's secret and the courage to bring it to light. After dinner, as we lingered over pie and coffee, Dorothy raised her glass. "To Margaret Turner," she said. "To all the women who did their best, even when it wasn't enough. And to the daughters who forgive them." We toasted, laughter and tears mingling. That night, as I lay in bed, I realized the shape of my life had changed. It would never be what I once thought it was, but it was fuller, richer, more honest. I knew there would always be echoes of pain, but I also knew that we'd built something new, a family, a legacy, a place where secrets could finally rest. The next morning, as sunlight spilled across the kitchen table, I found Tessa's notebook there, open to a new story. The first line read, "Once upon a time, there was a girl who learned the truth, and it set her free." I closed my eyes, letting the words settle over me, grateful for the truth and for the chance to finally breathe easy. But as winter crept in and the first snow dusted the town, a letter arrived, addressed simply to the daughters of Margaret Turner. It was postmarked from a city I didn't recognize, the handwriting unfamiliar. My heart skipped. Even now, after everything, the past had more to say. The envelope was thick, the kind of paper people use for important things, wills, final words, or maybe confessions that have grown too heavy to keep. I stood by the window, snow swirling against the glass, and turned it over in my hands. The daughters of Margaret Turner. No other names, no return address. Just that simple, careful script, as if the sender had measured each letter with trembling hands. I called Eva and Lila before opening it. "I think you both need to be here," I said, and they came, bundled in coats and scarves, cheeks flushed from the cold. We sat together at the kitchen table, the envelope between us, the air thick with anticipation and old wounds. Eva was the one who finally broke the silence. "Whatever it is, we'll face it together." I nodded and opened the envelope. Inside, there were pages, at least a dozen, all written in the same looping hand. A letter, and beneath it, copies of old court records, photographs, even a faded newspaper clipping. The letter began. "To the daughters I never knew, if you're reading this, it means I have found the courage I never had as a younger woman. My name is Edith Carroll. I was at the home with your mother, Margaret, in 1977. I watched her grieve. I watched her hope. I watched her lose and love at the same time." I read the words aloud, my voice trembling. Edith wrote of her friendship with our mother, of the nights they spent whispering in the dark, dreaming of futures where they could keep their babies. Futures where shame didn't build walls between mothers and daughters. She described how Margaret had comforted her, how they'd made a pact to find their children one day, to tell the truth when the world was ready. But Edith's story was harder. She'd lost her daughter to a closed adoption, and for years, she said, she'd watched the world move on without her. It was only after seeing our story, on the news, in the articles, in the reading room's dedication online, that she found the courage to begin searching for her own lost child. "I wanted you to know," Edith wrote, "that your mother's courage reached farther than you can imagine. Because of her, because of you, I have found my daughter. We are meeting for Christmas. I am writing to thank you, to tell you that the truth always matters, even when it hurts." I looked up, my cheeks wet with tears. Eva was crying openly, and Lila reached across the table to squeeze my hand. For a moment, the three of us just sat there, bound together by the sorrow and hope of a woman we'd never met. We read through the rest of the envelope. The court records confirmed Edith's search. The photographs showed her daughter, grown, smiling, the same hope in her eyes that I'd seen in Lila and Tessa. The newspaper clipping was from our own town, an article about the reading room, about Eva and me, about the healing that comes from speaking the truth. For a long time after, no one spoke. The snow fell harder, muffling the world beyond the window. I felt something settle inside me, a peace I'd chased for so long, I barely recognized it when it arrived. Eva broke the silence first. She found her daughter, because of us, because of Mom. I nodded, unable to trust my voice. Lila wiped her eyes and said, "I hope that someday someone writes a letter like that to me, to thank me for being honest, for being brave." I pulled her into my arms, holding her tight. "You already are, sweetheart. You already are." We spent the afternoon together, telling stories, baking cookies, filling the kitchen with laughter and warmth. Later, Dorothy and Tessa joined us, and our little family, patched together from loss and longing, felt whole in a way I'd never thought possible. When the sun began to set, painting the snow pink and gold, we gathered in the reading room one more time. I took out my mother's journal, the one I'd found months ago, and read the last entry aloud. If love is a story, then let mine be one of forgiveness. Let my daughters know I tried. Let them be braver than me. I closed the book, my heart both heavy and light. As the evening deepened, we sat in the quiet, each of us holding a piece of the story. My mother's story, Edith's, Dorothy's, even our own. I realized then that justice isn't always a verdict or an apology. Sometimes it's the simple, stubborn act of refusing to hide, of letting the truth breathe, of loving what is, not what should have been. Winter passed slowly, but gently. The reading room filled with sunlight and laughter, and the quiet turning of pages. More women came, some just to read, some to remember, some to finally speak the words they'd held inside for decades. The memory journal grew thick with stories of loss, of reunion, of hope. Lila flourished at school, writing essays about legacy and forgiveness. Tessa wrote her first short story, dedicating it to all the grandmothers who kept their hearts safe. Eva and I found comfort in our routines, in each other, in the knowledge that our family was no longer a secret, but a testament. On the anniversary of my mother's passing, we held a small gathering in the reading room. There were no speeches, no confessions, just quiet gratitude and the understanding that our story had become part of something larger. I sometimes wondered if my mother would have been proud of us. I like to think she would have been. I like to think she's somewhere, at peace, knowing her daughters found each other and found a way forward. The town, too, changed in subtle ways. The next Founders' Day, the mayor invited Eva and me to serve as grand marshals for the parade. Mrs. Carver sent us a bouquet of lilies with a note, "For the daughters who dared to speak." The reading room's plaque was polished, its words now a promise as much as a memorial. Sometimes, women would stop me on the street, their eyes shining. "Thank you," they'd say. "You helped me tell my own story." Every time, I smiled and told them the truth. We're all still writing. I think that's what my mother meant when she wrote about forgiveness. Not erasing the past, but letting it lead us someplace softer, someplace honest, someplace where we can lay down our burdens and pick up each other instead. Thanks for listening. Women Unwritten stands with every woman rewriting her ending.